All right? Now, we're going to go through this. If the prevalence of ankylosing spondylitis in your population is 0.4%, okay, and you use HLA-B27 as your only test, if the test is positive, the prevalence will be 3.6% of ankylosing spondylitis. If you add ARTS1 here, we'll increase it to 9.8%, and you add these two other genes to B27, the prevalence will go to 23%. Now, if you screen patients and find a population that has inflammatory back pain, let's say 10%. Let's say you've screened patients. And with that screening tool, you come up with a 10% prevalence. If you apply just B27, the prevalence will be 50%. If you add the other two genes, the prevalence goes up close to 90%. So these two new genes, if added to an inflammatory back pain population, will almost make the diagnosis of ankylosing spondylitis. So the answer is yes, these new genes are going to be helpful. So what is the SAA doing about helping us make an early diagnosis of ankylosing spondylitis? Where are your hard-earned dollars going when you contribute to the SAA? Well, how are they helping us? Well, we've done this back pain project here, which is to develop a questionnaire screening tool to distinguish AS patients from those with mechanical back pain. So we can take that 0.4% or that 5% and ratchet it up to 15%. And then apply the tests in a cost-effective manner to make a diagnosis. And this questionnaire will be on the website shortly. Now, how does this work? How do you do this? How do you use screening? What is screening anyway? Let's say you have a disease that has a 20% prevalence in a population, and you need to evaluate this. You have to do 1,000 patients here to get 200 new cases if the prevalence is 20%, right? You have to evaluate 1,000 people to get 200 new cases. However, if you separate the population into those with a high risk, medium, and low risk, and you only apply the screening tool to 1,000 people, okay, sorry, if the screening tool gives you the high-risk population and then you do your testing on only the high risk and you test 1,000 of these people, you'll get 400 cases. And if you use the high and the medium risk group, you'll get 320 cases as opposed to 200 only. So what you're doing is you're enriching the population or the pool of patients by this screening test. It's a very effective way of making a diagnosis. And that's presumably what we're going to do, and what the SAA will do is on their website, if you fulfill certain criteria, then you go to your doctor with this little sheet of paper and say, test me. Right? So it'll be a much more cost-effective way of doing this testing. So ankylosing spondylitis of yesterday was what we taught our medical students in the 1970s, is that the disease progressed relentlessly. And it was only managed more effectively when people ultimately did hip replacements. A hip replacement is not a way to manage this disease. You want to manage it long before you have to deal with hip replacements. So what does AS look like today? It's often diagnosed late and undertreated. Traditional therapies do provide mostly only symptomatic relief, and the anti-TNF drugs have been really a boon to patients with ankylosing spondylitis, and I'm sure you're going to want to ask questions about those drugs as we go forward. They've made a huge difference in the lives of our patients. An early diagnosis is close to being made with the development of assessment for inflammatory back pain and the new genes. At the very least, it's going to bring people out of the wilderness into a place where you can shine a light on it and treat it early, and hopefully treat it effectively. The genetic risk is almost completely understood, but more work needs to be done. And finally, will the newer therapies change the disease name from ankylosing spondylitis to just spondylitis? That's what we really would like to do, is get rid of the ankylosing part, the fusion of the bone and the stiffness part, and just call it inflammation, spondylitis. So that's our goal. We're all working together to do this. I've displayed for you the current tools, the things that we're doing in research, the forward-looking aspect of the disease, and hopefully with your support, we'll all move forward together. So thank you very much for your attention. Laura, you want to come up here and answer questions too? Because I can't answer them all. So,
Dr. Weisman, thank you very much.
Okay. I should say this politically correct. It's not a good idea to ask questions about your own case or your own difficulties. Because make it's really one not request, a place where we could do a diagnosis management here, and besides, other people might get annoyed if you just talk about yourself. So make your questions sort of generic about things, and I think everybody in the room will appreciate that more.
I was going to ask about, is this on, the idea of spontaneous mutation instead of genetic predisposition, because we had none in our family and my son has it, and we were told it had to be, first of all, either he's not my son or it's spontaneous mutation. And I saw him born, so I know he's my son. So we just wanted to know, if is this common? Or is that just, do they just make that up to cover their, it seems like such an odd thing.
What do you mean by spontaneous mutation?
Well, there's no history, and I've been tested, my husband, everybody in our family has been tested, and he's the only one that has it.
Everyone in the family has been tested for
the
B27
yes,
gene,
right.
And no one has the gene.
And I assume that parents, I don't mean to be that specific to my case, but parents have to pass it to a child.
Right.
But that did not happen. Apparently, unless it's wrong, maybe the testing was done wrong. Is that absurd, or is that, I just want to know if that's common.
The first question's the toughest one.
I'm sorry, and it's just been a confusion to us because we kept thinking maybe it's misdiagnosed, but it's a very classic case. They're saying it's very classic. And he already has the damage and everything.
When you asked the question to what kind of answer did you get? That this B27 just occurred out of the blue?
That there's a thing called spontaneous mutation,
yeah.
Genetic spontaneous mutation.
Yeah. I'm not a geneticist, as you can tell, and so I get tongue-tied when I start talking about this. I really don't know the answer to that question. I think mostly these alleles have to come from the parents. Now, we'll have some fun. When you do genetic testing for any disease in this, okay, so you brought it up now. Okay. When you do any genetic testing for anything, okay, it turns out that 10% of the parents are not, one of the parents is not the parent of the child. All right, I don't know.
Hey, Michael, I have another question.
It's an interesting, it doesn't matter whether the genetic testing is done for anything, in any population, in any socioeconomic, demographic, whatever group that is done. And you do careful looking at the genes from both parents and the child. 10% of these are found this way. Now, that's a whole other issue, which you addressed. You brought up.
What if is your son B27 positive or negative?
Yes.
That's what she's saying.
Oh, he is positive.
Yeah.
Oh, he is positive. Okay.
And he looks like one of you guys. I swear.
It's very clear. So it's just weird.
It is weird. You asked me a good question. What I'll do is I'm going to talk to my geneticist colleagues and ask them how this comes about, that how can somebody be B27 positive child and the B27 parents are negative. Some of it may have to do with testing, because the sensitivity of the B27 testing depends on whether you have one allele or two alleles. And there are B27 subgroups. It's a complicated story. So I will find out an answer on that question. Well, you did. You did a good job. But it gave me a chance to tell my genetic story. Anyway, it's like when my son got married in Tennessee. You know, the marriage certificate said, it said, Tommy said, this is null and void if either of the two parties is intoxicated. That was the thing. And on the bottom it asked the question, are the two of you related? That was Tennessee. But that's it. Anyway, go ahead.
This is sort of related, kind of a genetic question. If you don't have the B27 gene, is one of the other two new ones that they've discovered that are associated, is that sufficient in and of itself to give you ankylosing spondylitis? Or can there be a mistake, like you said, in the testing?
It's been known up to this point that 10 and sometimes up to 20% of people with absolute bona fide ankylosing spondylitis are B27 negative. Right? So it's really not the total answer to the question. All right? So you can have just as severe a disease and be B27 negative. And it may have nothing to do with the ARTS1 or the IL-23R. All right? You know that most people that have B27 don't have ankylosing spondylitis. Right? Because the prevalence is 4 to 8% in the Caucasian population in the United States. So most people with B27 don't have ankylosing spondylitis. Really. And the same is true for ARTS and IL-23. All right? So what you're doing then is adding these probabilities together and coming up with a larger probability. Right? So it's not 100%.
So, in my particular instance, I have a brother that's B27 positive and he has AS, and I'm negative and I have AS. So that makes me think that there's something else there that we have in common.
Sure, absolutely.
That
but
nobody knows about.
Well, that's why we do these studies, is to take you and your brother and do these genome-wide scans and see which genes pop up more frequently in the population that identifies you and your brother. Because you and your brother share something else beside B27, because you don't share B27.
Right.
That's what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay. Go ahead, but you got to use the microphone, I guess, because they're...
While she's coming up, may I ask a question? I'm at the mic already.
Oh, sure. Hi.
Several slides back, you had at a bottom bullet the relationship with AS, with RA, I don't think it was psoriasis, but psoriatic arthritis. If you could go back several slides, can you back up?
What's your question about it?
The question is, you didn't talk about it. So what were you planning to say about it?
That for a long time we've known that there is a relationship among certain clinical phenotypes, like psoriasis, psoriatic arthritis, Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, and ankylosing spondylitis. We've known for a long time clinically there's a relationship, because one group of diseases will develop the other condition at a very high frequency, a greater frequency than in the population. And so the nickname for that was called the spondyloarthropathies, because most of them had spine involvement, but not all. When B27 was discovered in the 1970s, it turns out that B27 linked some of those diseases together, but not perfectly well. Now that IL-1RA and ART and ARCH23 have been discovered, it turns out that that's very highly found in patients with Crohn's disease. And Crohn's disease has now become the new darling of the geneticists, because Crohn's disease has a very tight genetic link as well. And so it turns out that there's a major overlap between Crohn's disease and ankylosing spondylitis, because ankylosing spondylitis patients may have what we call a subclinical inflammation in their gut that's not nearly as severe to be manifest by actual Crohn's with diarrhea or blood in the stool. We know that now because some years ago, ankylosing spondylitis patients in Europe volunteered, believe it or not, to have colonoscopies and barium enemas done when they were asymptomatic. They didn't have any symptoms of diarrhea or abdominal pain. And it turned out that a very high percentage, like 30% of those patients, had some lesions in their gut. Now, when we do some very sophisticated testing for Crohn's disease, using some special antibodies for Crohn's disease, we can find those antibodies present in spondylitis patients. That's our research. And now we're going to use a very sensitive method of evaluating stool specimens of patients with ankylosing spondylitis, looking for signs of inflammation that come out in the stool. And we're going to then use a capsule endoscopies. You heard of these things? Anybody ever had one done? Where it's a video camera in a capsule, like a pill, and you swallow it, and it takes a picture of your gut as it goes all the way out. Just like, what is that movie? It's like the movies, right? So now, capsule video endoscopy